is your greatest fear? Maybe it's going to the dentist, especially when needles are involved or deep root canals are mentioned. Maybe you are fearful of heights. And if that's you, as it is for me, don't visit the Empire State Building as I did a few years ago. My body just seized up and I found myself almost unable to function as I looked towards lower Manhattan. Perhaps it's snakes or maybe spiders. For some people, it's thunder and lightning, the noise of an electrical storm. But according to a recent survey, there is one fear that is above them all. It's the fear of having to give a public speech. Somehow, having to give a speech in public is ranked even higher than death itself, which, by the way, was third on the list. So according to this logic, it appears that most people at a funeral service would rather be the person in the coffin than the person who stands up to give the eulogy. Fear. We all suffer from fears of one sort or another. Some fears are real, some are false. In the Old Testament story of David and Goliath, King Saul and the entire Israelite army gave in to their fears when they saw this monster of a man named Goliath. They ran for their lives. And in this story, there are some principles and lessons which are helpful to us in conquering those giants that we sometimes face. Just picture the scene of this Sunday school favourite. On opposite sides of the valley, there were armies of Israel and the Philistines. And then the Philistine champion makes his appearance. The Hebrew language tells us that he was 6 cubits and a span, so nearly 3 meters tall. If he had a Welsh grandmother, I think we would have had him play in second row. Brilliant in the line-out. This guy was certainly big. But in this story, we're not only informed of his size, but also of what he was wearing. 1 Samuel chapter 17 informs us that he wore a coat of scale armour of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. That's about 125 pounds, 9 stone. He had a bronze helmet and leggings to protect his shins, and even carried a javelin with a head of iron weighing about 15 pounds, roughly the same as a shot put. To give him extra protection, there was a shield carrier who stood with a man-sized shield in front of him. Just imagine seeing this guy for the first time. He would be your worst nightmare. Intimidation was the name of the game. And that was what Goliath did so well. He was defiant, aggressive, arrogant. As we say today, he was in your face. The other thing that Goliath did was he flaunted his size and strength for 40 days, morning and evening. There was no let-up. There was no escape from the intimidation for the armies of Israel. We might not need to face literal giants, but we at times all need to face problems and difficulties and trials which are like giants to us. They shout out fear and intimidation and can bully us into submission. They come and destroy our peace and preoccupy our thoughts. Those giants can take a variety of forms. Illness, where life is an uphill struggle and where we are drained of strength. It might be the illness of a loved one, which has a significant impact on the whole family. Unemployment, job insecurity. How will I pay the mortgage? How will I cope financially? How will I put food on the table? How will I pay my utility bills this month? Fear of the future or fear of the unknown. Jesus said, can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to his life? And he instructed his disciples to not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow, says Jesus, has enough worry about itself. It's one thing to quote those words. It's one thing to underline them in our Bibles. But it's another thing altogether to be able to live by Jesus' instruction. Perhaps our giants are people, where we experience a difficult relationship with a family member or a neighbour or a work colleague or someone we knew as a friend. For some, The giant may be a tough decision we are pressed to make. Life is full of decisions, some big and important, some small and less significant. Some of our decisions will have a momentous consequence in our lives. Even at the mention of the word giant, my guess is that some of you will already immediately know what I'm talking about and what your giant looks like in real life to yourselves. When we encounter giants in our lives, there's two possible responses. There's the response of Saul, who was the people's choice for king, and the response of David, who was God's choice for king. Saul's problem throughout his life, as we saw in last week's study, was that he feared man more than he feared God. If there was a person in Israel who should have gone out to fight this freak of a man, it was Saul himself. We are told in 1 Samuel chapter 10 that Saul was head and shoulders taller than anyone else, and there was no one else like him in the nation. Saul was the best that they had. He was a man's man. He was a warrior. But enter David, and this is where the story gets almost comical. David, who was on an errand from his father, taking food to his soldier brothers and finding out how they were so that he could report back to his father. And on his journey to the front line, he hears for the first time this monster, Goliath, shouting out his threats across the valley. I can imagine his eyes widening and his jaw dropping as he looks at this armoured tank of a man who stood there breathing out threats and abuse. And David's response: who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? I can well imagine some of the older soldiers saying, "Shh, lad, shh, not so loud, he might hear you." Why was David so different? Why did he have such courage when others didn't? Why was he apparently unafraid of this giant of a man? And more importantly, perhaps for us, what can we learn from him in facing our own giants? David believed a number of things. Firstly, he believed that God is always greater than our giants. And this was the greatest difference between Saul and David. Saul saw the situation as hopeless because he had not accounted for God, whereas with David, God was in the equation. Let me encourage you today. God is greater than your greatest giant. That's so important, I'm going to say it again. God is greater than your greatest giants. Don't attempt to fight the battle in your own strength. Don't try to muster up enough strength and faith in yourself. Don't leave God out of the equation as Saul did. There are two ways of looking at giants. You can look at them through the physical eyes, or you can look at them through spiritual eyes, through eyes of logic or through eyes of faith. Do you remember that story in the book of Numbers where 12 spies were sent out into the land of Canaan on a reconnaissance mission to spy out what sort of land this wandering nation of Israel were about to enter? The 12 spies saw many things. They saw that the land before them was good and fruitful. The phrase that they used was, "It's a land flowing with milk and honey." But, and there's always a but, the spies also reported that there were large fortified cities with walls up to the sky. They'd reported also that they'd seen giants that made them look as small as grasshoppers. The spies reported back that they'd seen the descendants of Anak there, a tribe who were known for their size and strength. They also had seen large fortified cities. All of that was true, of sorts. Listen to the way that they exaggerated the account. They spoke of walls up to the sky, and we were like grasshoppers in comparison. And that's a problem for many of us today. We often overestimate or over-exaggerate our giants, and we underestimate God. Out of the 12 spies, only 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, came back and said, "We can take this land." Notice, they all saw the same things. They all saw the giants. They all saw the fortified cities. But 10 spies looked through human eyes, and Caleb and Joshua looked through spiritual eyes. Caleb and Joshua were the only two who had God in the equation when they looked at what was before them. The giants that we face might be real enough, but God is greater. When Saul looked at David, his first reaction was, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy." And he has been a fighting man since his youth. And there are times in our lives when we can be too logical, too rational, so much so that we do not leave room for faith, nor room for God. Have you got any rivers you think are uncrossable? Got any mountains you can't tunnel through? God specializes in things thought impossible. He can do what none other can do. Secondly, David's perspective came from past victories. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 34, "But David said to Saul, 'Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine.' Saul said to David, 'Go, and the Lord be with you.'" David had been in life-threatening situations before. He'd been in danger from lions and bears, but he came out the other end. And David's reasoning was good. David acknowledged that it was the Lord who had delivered him at those times. And the God who had delivered him in the past would not let him down in the present either. And it's so important that we learn lessons from the past. And one of the biggest problems is that we have such short memories. We see God at work in perhaps some amazing ways in the past, but when we face a similar situation or dilemma the next time round, we have often forgotten the power and the presence of God we experienced on that previous occasion. "And all my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God." We love singing those words in our church, but we need to do more than just sing those words. We need to live by them. And as we look back on all of our lives, recognizing that God has been with us in thick and thin, in the good times and the not so good times, and that we've experienced his faithfulness and his goodness. He is the same God. He has not changed. The God who saw you through the trials in the past is the ever-present refuge and strength for today and also for tomorrow. Remember when the Israelites crossed the River Jordan? Can you remember what God instructed the people to do? He told them to get one man from each of the tribes of Israel and collect large stones from the riverbed. They were then to make a memorial at Gilgal with these stones. Why? Well, in Joshua chapter 4, we are told, "Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." In future generation, they had stones to look upon and remember the amazing intervention of God in that situation. And even though David didn't actually have mementos of a bear's skin or a lion's paw, he certainly had memories of those events, and his memories fed his faith. He attributed his past victories to God being with him. And when we face some new giant, It is always a good thing to remind ourselves of past victories, to remind ourselves of all the things that God has done, and to remember the ways that he has worked in the past, and to think about the way that he has answered prayer, and think of the way that he has turned a hopeless situation into a situation where we encountered blessing. David could look back and say, God did it then. He can do it now. Do you remember the story of Joseph and how he interpreted the dream of Pharaoh and said that there would be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine? And during the 7 years of plenty, people were to store away produce that they could use when the famine set in. It's such a good spiritual principle and lesson here. We never really know when the famine or when the giants will confront us. The days of plenty, we need to store away, to prepare our hearts, remain strong in the Lord. Inevitably, from time to time, giants do come. They come, they intimidate us. Therefore, we must be ready. Thirdly, David chose to trust God, not in human schemes. We read that King Saul dressed David up in his own armor. There's a wonderful moment of humor here. You can just picture it. Saul is XXX large and David is small medium. He would not have been able to walk in Saul's armor, let alone fight the giant Goliath. It might have been okay for Saul, but it was not okay for David. David took out his sling and chose 5 stones to use. Ridiculous, really. Yet, that is the way that God so loves to work. He loves to confound the wisdom of the wise. He loves to use weak people like you and me. We don't have to be strong or resilient or intelligent or articulate or eloquent. All he asks is that we should trust him. And fourthly, David chose which battles to fight wisely. Now, this point is so important. When David started speaking to the men about Goliath, his older brother Eliab, that he's the one who Samuel thought might have been the next king. We're told that Eliab burned with anger. Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the desert? A little bit of a put down, to say the least. Eliab continues, I know how conceitful you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now, if he'd been my big brother, he might have had a bunch of 5s. But we read of David. He turned away. Why? Why didn't he protest his innocence, that he wasn't doing any of those things that his brother accused him of? Why didn't he put the record straight? Why did he let his brother say those things that he said? Very simply, he knew which battle to fight. His fight was with Goliath, not Eliab. He wasn't going to waste time or strength fighting against his own brother. There are some giants which we don't need to fight. They just need to be ignored. The time, the energy and anxiety that I've wasted over the years, not forgetting the sleepless nights, over people, sometimes spiteful people whose names I can't even remember now. Yet at the time they were like giants who stood before me. Many churches and many Christians need to learn the lesson of choosing to fight the right battles. Let's make sure that we don't become preoccupied with majoring on minors, that we forget the real work and the real battle. It's not with those who disagree with us, but it's with the spiritual powers in high places. Paul writes, the battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers and against the rulers of the darkness. I said to our Wednesday meeting a few weeks ago that there are too many custard Christians around. Well, when I said that, a few of them looked rather puzzled at my comment, so I needed to explain. I said custard Christians are those who get upset over trifles. Let us always remember that that which unites us is far greater than that which divides us. What are your giants today? What in your life is bringing fear and intimidation? What's bringing you sleepless nights? Let me encourage you to hold on, to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. It's often in the unexpected, unwanted and unwarranted events of our lives that help us to project into the next phase of God's purposes, and those times very often deepen our own spiritual growth. Times of real disappointment and discouragement can become avenues of blessing in God's hand. So let us remember, God is always trustworthy, even when people are not. God is always committed to our flourishing, even when people are not. God is always good. He is for you. He is not against you. It was Smith Wigglesworth, a great Pentecostal pioneer, who once said, "Great faith is the product of great fights. Great testimonies are the outcome of great tests. Great triumphs can only come out of great trials." Philippa Hanna's wonderful modern hymn states, "When all foundations have been shaken, when I'm left standing in the dark, and all I feel is my heart breaking, you still reign, and you're still God. And when it feels all hope has faded, the heavy questions hit so hard, and though my soul may feel forsaken, you still reign, and you're still God. Though I can't see what's before me, I know that I can trust your heart, and this one truth will be my story. You still reign, and you're still God." God bless you. Thank you for joining us today. Do have a great week. God bless.
You were the Word at the beginning, one with God, the Lord Most High. Your hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. You didn't want heaven without us, so Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this.